You take one more step and you're done. You hear me?
I'm right where I need to be.
The line at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport moved the way airport lines always move on a Thursday morning. Slow, indifferent, packed with the ordinary noise of rolling luggage and muffled announcements. Marcus Ellington stood near the middle of it, a carry-on at his feet, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. He was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a plain gray pullover, fresh white shoes. He looked like a man on his way to a business meeting or a family visit. He was calm. He had no reason not to be. Marcus was 41 years old. He had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, 15 miles from where he was standing. He had gone to college on a Navy scholarship, graduated near the top of his class, and then disappeared into a world most people only read about in books they can't fact-check. He had served 22 years. He had done things in service to his country that would never appear on any public document. He had buried teammates. He had carried the weight of classified operations that spanned 3 continents. He was, by any objective measure, one of the most thoroughly vetted and extensively cleared human beings in the entire building. But none of that was visible on Thursday morning. What was visible was a black man standing in line at the airport. He reached the front of the security checkpoint at 9:47 a.m. He placed his bag on the conveyor, removed his laptop, dropped his shoes into the bin, and stepped forward through the body scanner without a word. The machine made no sound. He walked through clean. He was reaching for his shoes when he heard the voice. "Sir, step to the side." The agent who said it was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s named Craig Bowers. He wore the TSA uniform with the particular rigidity of someone who had built his identity around it. His eyes were flat and certain. He was already moving toward Marcus before Marcus had finished turning around. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked. "I said step to the side." Marcus stepped to the side. He asked again, calmly, what the issue was. Bowers didn't answer. He called for a secondary screening, speaking into his radio with a tone that implied urgency where none had been established. A second agent arrived, younger, visibly uncertain. Bowers pointed at Marcus's carry-on and told the younger agent to pull it off the belt. "That bag cleared the scanner," Marcus said. "We'll be the judge of that." Around them, the checkpoint continued moving. Travelers glanced over, then looked away, the way people do in airports when they want to believe that whatever is happening to someone else is not something they need to think about. A woman in a red coat paused at the edge of the cordon. A teenage boy near the family lane was already holding up his phone. Bowers instructed Marcus to place his hands out to his sides. Marcus complied. The wand passed over him twice. Nothing triggered. Bowers told him to turn around anyway. Marcus turned. Bowers ran the wand again, then nodded to the younger agent, who was already unzipping the carry-on with the practiced indifference of someone following an order they weren't sure made sense. "What are you looking for?" Marcus asked. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop talking." That was the moment. Not the unzipping. Not the secondary screening. That single sentence, delivered with the casual certainty of a man who believed he held all the power in the room, was the moment that would later be watched by over 14 million people. Because the woman in the red coat had already pulled out her phone. She wasn't the only one. The teenage boy had been recording for nearly 2 minutes. A man in a business suit near gate B-12 had begun filming from the escalator. The angle from the red coat woman was the clearest. It captured Bowers's face directly. It captured the expression on it. Not professional concern, not procedural focus, but something that looked, to anyone watching the video later, like contempt. Bowers moved to conduct a physical pat-down without asking Marcus for consent. He placed his hands on Marcus's shoulders and began pressing down. Marcus did not move. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of what was happening inside him. He had been in rooms where the wrong response got people killed. He knew how to keep still. He kept still. "This is excessive," Marcus said, voice low and controlled. "You're being non-compliant." "I have complied with everything you have asked." Bowers leaned in. "You want to keep pushing this?" It wasn't a procedural question. It wasn't a safety concern. It was a threat, delivered 6 inches from Marcus Ellington's face, in a public airport, in front of approximately 30 witnesses and at least 4 active phone cameras. Bowers's supervisor would later describe this moment as a violation of no fewer than 7 separate TSA conduct protocols. But that was later. At 9:53 a.m., Bowers told the younger agent to call airport police. He stated, into his radio, that he had a non-compliant passenger who may have attempted to tamper with security equipment. There was no evidence of tampering. The bag had cleared the scanner. Marcus had cleared the scanner. The entire basis for the stop, from the moment Bowers had issued his first order, was the decision of one man whose entire interaction with Marcus Ellington had lasted less than 6 minutes and had consisted of nothing more procedurally justifiable than a look he had decided to take too seriously. 2 airport police officers arrived within 4 minutes. One of them, Officer Dana Reyes, stepped to the front of the situation and looked at Bowers with the quiet expression of someone running a quick assessment. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the open bag on the table. She looked at the growing ring of phones aimed at the checkpoint. "What's the threat assessment here?" she asked Bowers. Bowers hesitated for the first time. "Non-compliant passenger," he said. Reyes looked at Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" Marcus looked at her evenly. He said his name. Then he said something else. 3 words. Quietly, without performance. "Check my clearance." Reyes frowned slightly. She asked him what he meant. He reached slowly into the interior pocket of his carry-on and removed a folded document and a card. He handed both to her without a word. The younger TSA agent, who was standing close enough to see what was printed on the card, physically stepped back. Officer Reyes read the document. She read it again. Her face did not change dramatically, but something in her posture shifted. The subtle recalibration of someone who has just understood that the situation they walked into is not the situation they were told it was. Marcus Ellington held a current Department of Defense identification card. He was a retired Master Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Team 6, with a service record that spanned combat deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, and 2 other locations that remain classified. He had been awarded the Navy Cross, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart. At the time he was standing at Checkpoint D being told to stop talking. He was en route to Washington, D.C., where he was scheduled to deliver a security briefing to a subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee as a subject matter expert on counterterrorism operations. He had a government escort waiting at the gate. The escort had been monitoring the delay. He had already made a phone call. Officer Reyes looked at Craig Bowers. She didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't need to. The younger TSA agent had quietly moved away from the table. The crowd that had gathered around the checkpoint was not moving. The phones were still up. And Bowers, who 2 minutes earlier had been leaning 6 inches from this man's face asking him if he wanted to keep pushing, was standing very still with the expression of someone who had just felt the floor disappear beneath them. The government escort, a man named Pierce, arrived at the checkpoint at 10:04 a.m. He was in a suit. He badged his way through with the kind of authority that doesn't ask for permission. He spoke quietly to Officer Reyes for approximately 90 seconds. He looked at Bowers once. He did not speak to Bowers. He didn't need to. He made 2 phone calls in the next 3 minutes. The first was to the TSA Federal Security Director for Hartsfield-Jackson. The second was to a number that Pierce did not announce out loud. Marcus Ellington collected his belongings, put on his shoes, and picked up his coffee, which was cold by then. He didn't say anything to Bowers. He didn't look at him. He walked through the checkpoint and disappeared toward the gate without ceremony, the way he had been trained to move through hostile environments, like someone who already knew what was coming next and had already decided it wasn't his problem to manage. The 4 videos posted to social media that afternoon collectively accumulated more than 40 million views within 72 hours. The Redcoat woman's footage was the most shared. Frame captures from her video ran in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and 17 international outlets by the following morning. Marcus Ellington's identity had been verified and publicly reported within hours of the videos going live. His photograph, which showed a man in full dress uniform standing beside a senior naval commander, the Navy Cross visible on his chest, was the second most shared image on social media that Friday. Craig Bowers' name was pulled from public TSA records and confirmed by 2 separate journalists by that same evening. The TSA Office of Inspection opened a formal inquiry within 24 hours. Internal complaints from 3 TSA employees at Hartsfield-Jackson, including the younger agent who had been present at the checkpoint, were submitted to airport management within 48 hours. All 3 described a pattern of conduct by Bowers that included racially discriminatory targeting, verbal intimidation of passengers, and procedural violations that had been reported informally before and not acted on. One complaint referenced an incident from 11 months earlier in which Bowers had subjected a Black Army officer to a prolonged secondary screening that similarly lacked documented justification. That incident had been internally flagged and then quietly filed away. It was not quiet anymore. The Senate Armed Services Committee, the subcommittee Marcus Ellington had been traveling to brief, released a statement calling the incident deeply troubling and demanding a formal explanation from TSA leadership. 2 senators requested a briefing from the DHS Inspector General. A congressman from Georgia announced he was calling for an independent review of TSA screening procedures and documented patterns of racial disparity at major airports. The Department of Homeland Security Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties launched a separate, parallel investigation 14 days after the incident. Federal investigators interviewed Bowers, his supervisors, and 11 witnesses. They reviewed 500 days of checkpoint camera footage from Bowers's assigned lanes and found 43 additional incidents that warranted further review. In 29 of those 43 cases, the passenger subjected to unexplained secondary screening or extended physical contact was Black. Craig Bowers was placed on administrative leave within 3 days of the incident. He was terminated from federal employment 41 days later following the completion of the internal inquiry. The TSA's official termination notice cited conduct unbecoming a federal officer, pattern of discriminatory targeting, deliberate violation of screening protocols, and retaliatory verbal conduct toward a passenger. The notice was 1.5 pages long. It did not contain a single sentence that could be read as ambiguous. A civil rights attorney filed suit on behalf of Marcus Ellington against the TSA and the Department of Homeland Security 60 days after the airport encounter. The lawsuit alleged racial discrimination under federal civil rights statutes, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of Fourth Amendment protections. The case was assigned to a federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia. It did not settle quietly. It did not disappear into mediation. It moved forward with the particular gravity of a case that had been watched by 40 million people and documented from 4 separate angles. Congress passed a procedural accountability amendment attached to an appropriations bill 8 months after the incident, requiring TSA field offices to conduct mandatory racial bias audits of secondary screening selections at the nation's 35 busiest airports. The amendment was co-authored by the same senator whose subcommittee Marcus had been flying to brief that morning. Marcus Ellington gave one interview after the incident. He sat in a plain chair in a plain room and spoke without visible anger. He said that what had happened to him had happened to Black men in this country every single day, in airports and on streets and in parking lots and everywhere else, and that the only difference in his case was that people found out who he was, and that the question everyone needed to sit with was what that said about who we decide deserves to be believed before the credential gets shown, and who we make prove it first. He didn't shout. He didn't perform grief. He just said it plainly, the way a man says something he has known for a long time and has waited a long time to say out loud. Craig Bowers did not give an interview. He was last reported to be contesting his termination through a federal employee union grievance process that his own union described, in a statement that was itself leaked to the press, as legally without merit. The checkpoint at Concourse D was retrained. The policy was rewritten. The record was sealed, then unsealed, then entered into federal litigation. And somewhere above Atlanta, flying north in a government-arranged seat on a rescheduled flight, Marcus Ellington opened a folder, reviewed his briefing notes, and went back to work. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes through the quiet devastation of a credential pulled from a carry-on bag, a federal case number assigned to a file, and a pattern finally made visible after decades of being allowed to hide. If this story made you feel something, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because accountability has to be witnessed to mean anything.